Hello and welcome to Molo Molo African Tech Stories. I am Dr. Paulin Kantwe, and together we will be discovering the amazing stories of African champions and innovators that are shaping the future of the African continent. Now, we are traveling to an incredible place today, and it is the land of Ghana. Ghana, otherwise known as the Black Stars, otherwise known or famously known as the Ashanti Kingdom. I'm excited today because it is a place where we is very well known. Ghana, of course, those of you who don't know where Ghana is a West African country very close to the Gulf of Guinea. The Gulf of Guinea is essentially, if you were to draw a map of Africa, it is essentially at the cusp of Africa in terms of the countries. If you think of Nigeria, Cameroon, Gabon, and of course, as you go towards the western side, you will start getting towards Ivory Coast, Ghana, Togo, and so forth. And it is an incredible, incredible land. But we'll be traveling at a specific time. And I'm really excited because today is going to be a mix of my passion for aviation and aeronautical engineering, but also an incredible champion. So let's get into the context, shall we? Let's get right into it. By the way, I have before we get into it, I since my last episode, which was on Dr. Samira Musa. If you haven't watched it yet, it is now available everywhere on whether it is Spotify or YouTube, depending on whether you're watching this or you're hearing this from any of the audio platforms. It is definitely a story worth listening or watching. But based on the story I have of Dr. Samira Musa, I've got an incredible or interesting, I must say, a bit of a funny story. Not a really incredible for me, but most of you will probably think it's just another story. But ever since ever since we shot the previous episode of Dr. Samira Musa, my son, his name is Samson, he actually got to see the episode. Of course, it's not really for kids, but for sure there's some learnings there for him as well. And there was one thing that he mentioned that he actually said I must keep doing, which is try and look presentable and try and look smart for YouTube. So I am I am trying my best to allude to the wishes of an 8-year old by keeping up a certain appearance. But in any case, I just thought I should share it with you that, we are definitely having 8-year olds giving us direction on how this podcast should look like. Having said that, we are in the land of Ghana, and I'm going to read the context of exactly where we're going to be in terms of year or time and what is the backdrop for our African champion. Let's read. In the decade leading up to the 1979 coup d'etat in Ghana, the country faced economic challenges and political instability under the leadership of Ignatius Kutu Ajepong. Living conditions were affected by economic mismanagement, corruption, and a decline in key sectors. Ajepong's populist policies aimed at nationalization and economic self-sufficiency led to inefficiencies, inflation, and hardship to many citizens. Following the coup in 1979, Flight Lieutenant Jerry Rawlings assumed power, marking a period of significant change. Rawlings pursued economic reforms, anti-corruption measures, and social programs. The living conditions initially saw improvements as Rawlings sought to address the economic issues inherited by the previous regime. However, the era was also marked with periods of political repression. Over the subsequent decade, Ghana experienced economic challenges and adjustment policies. But despite these hardships, Ghana's resilience contributed to a gradual economic recovery in the years following the 1979 coup, setting the stage for the future development and political transitions. So it was an interesting time. Now, most of you who are watching this might not necessarily know why, but in terms of the coup d'etat in 1979, but fundamentally, Ghana was going through a transition period where they, I think, just under 2 decades ago, they had achieved independence, probably slightly more, to be fair, and of course there was transition. I think last episode we talked about Egypt and Dr. Samira Musa being at a time of independence and reform, and it was the same thing happening here in Ghana. But more importantly, or should I say specifically, Jerry Rawlings, who is our next champion, became president after the failings, or at least the misfortunes from the previous president, and sought to bring political change. Now, you may think, huh, we are not really talking about politics here, but let me read the biography of Jerry Rawlings and you'll understand how this fits an African tech story. Jerry John Rawlings, born June 22nd, I was born in June 22nd, 1947, in Accra, Ghana, was a pivotal figure in the nation's history. Initially an Air Force officer, Rawlings rose to prominence through the 1979 coup, overthrowing the government of Ignatius Kutu Achepo. Initially serving as the head of Provisional National Defense Council, Rawlings later transitions Ghana towards multi-party democracy. In his early years, Jerry Rawlings pursued mastering flight jet aircrafts, driven by a deep commitment to national defense and a desire to contribute actively to the country's military capabilities, aiming to enhance Ghana's sovereignty and security. His motivation was rooted in a sense of duty and a vision for a strong, self-reliant nation capable of defending its interests. In March 1968, he was posted at Takoradi in Ghana's western region to continue his studies. He graduated in January 1969 and was commissioned as a pilot officer, eventually winning the coveted Speedbird Trophy as the best cadet in flying the Sukhoi 7 ground attack supersonic jet aircraft, as he was skilled in aerobatics. Now, we are not talking about Jerry Rawlings, the president. We are not talking about Jerry Rawlings, the activist. We are not even talking about Jerry Rawlings, the father. Potentially, we will get into that. But we are talking about Jerry Rawlings, the tech champion in aviation as a fighter jet pilot. Now, most of you might not even realize this. In actual fact, the history books tell us that for sure he had a lot more decades as a president than he had as a military fighter pilot. But unfortunately, history also doesn't tell us what it took him to get to the position where he had such amazing reforms that potentially got from the training as a fighter jet pilot. And that is the backdrop. We are focusing today on Jerry Rawlings and his amazing history and just context of someone who was an activist, but way before that, he was an incredible pilot. Now, if we were to think about what I just read and the fact that he was a fighter jet pilot, the one thing that comes to mind when I think of a fighter jet pilot and a cadet that won, kind of the best bird trophy and showed acrobatics, I think of a very famous movie and one movie that I hold dear in my heart, and I think of Top Gun. Top Gun, starred by Tom Cruise, what is an incredible movie because it reveals the passions of an individual in terms of the flying machine that is, or at least for that movie, the F-16, but prior to that, of course, the F-14. And that is something that Jerry Rawlings emulated in Ghana in 1979. Now, if you were to think about it, we will go into what the machine means, right? The Sukhoi 7, the Su 7 aircraft, which is a Russian aircraft, which was, of course, given over to Ghana. And there's a lot of political kind of context to why Ghana, who was initially a British colony, got hold of Russian aircraft. But there's a lot of history there. But fundamentally, that's not really the point, because we are talking about how Jerry Rawlings, in his years as a young cadet, became Top Gun. He became the Ghanaian Top Gun who fundamentally had the aspirations to free his nation from mediocrity in terms of political misgivings. Now, of course, let's just take a step back, right? Because we know that the fighter aircraft in general, irrespective of who built it, whether it is Boeing or Raytheon or Northrop Grumman or whoever it is, or Mirage, we know, Dassault, we know that a fighter aircraft is an incredible piece of engineering to master. And that is something that we should reflect on. Because let me give you some facts on the Sukhoi 7 aircraft. The Sukhoi 7 was manufactured roughly around, I think its first or last concept was made in 1955. It was predominantly a ground attack jet aircraft. What does that mean? Ground attack basically means it's not necessarily a dogfighting aircraft, so it's not highly maneuverable, but is an aircraft that has potentially long range and also is able to carry a lot of weapons, that is able to do what? It is able to essentially launch a ground attack. So fundamentally, there is some level of characteristics that such an aircraft needs to have in order to fulfill that mission. Now, like I said, the Sukhoi 7 was manufactured by a Russian by the Russians, and fundamentally its first flight was in 1955. This aircraft in 1970s was already able to achieve Mach 2. Mach 2 basically means it's able to be able to fly twice the speed of sound, which, if you put it into context, it is roughly twice as fast, if not 2.5 times as fast as when you fly your commercial um, airplane from, I guess, from maybe, in the context of what we're talking about, from South Africa to Accra. And that fundamentally is showing us the speed at which this aircraft was able to achieve. Now, this aircraft also was able to have, like I mentioned before, because it's a ground attack aircraft, it was able to achieve a range of up to 1,200 kilometers, which is a huge amount of range, mainly because it's supposed to take armaments from a really far away, and of course go into the front lines and fundamentally disrupt the opponent's armory. Now, this aircraft also had a really cool feature. It already was one of the first aircrafts. Now we have almost most fighter jet aircraft are able to have their wings move. The Sukhoi 7 was one of the first aircraft that introduced a swept wing design. A swept wing design meaning that when an aircraft is trying to land, fundamentally its wings are actually retracted slightly forward. So it just gives you a sense of more of a commercial um, plane, like a commercial airline that we all take. It's got its wings almost straight. But a swept wing design allows you to move the wings further back, almost like when you are trying to go down a ski slope, or when you're trying to go faster as you're riding your bicycle. You arch in and you create your body really small, and a swept wing design allows you to do exactly that. That's an incredible piece of technology in the early 70s that Jerry Rawlings had to master. Now, of course, the most fundamental thing about the Sukhoi 7 was it had a single seat. What does that mean? It means that when you get up in the air, this incredible beast of armament, of long range, of incredible altitude, right? It flies even higher than what we fly commercially, but also incredible speed. You only had yourself to make decisions, to strategize, to follow the mission, to abort the mission, or fundamentally to forge on. And that is a context that we all need to take into account and just keep that in mind. That was the training that Jerry Rawlings perfected. Now, if you were to really think about this, now I have a deep love for aerospace, as you know. I think I introduced myself hopefully quite clearly the very first podcast. If you haven't watched it, the first podcast, please do so. It's all about kind of giving you a bit of a story regarding resilience and aligning yourself with your values with work, and of course introducing who I am in a nutshell. But for sure, Jerry Rawlings, in his first years of military service, had a passion. He had a passion for the aircrafts. He had a passion for flying. He had a passion for speed. Now I'm not a junkie for speed for sure. I don't even have a pilot license. So I wouldn't say that I even know what that means. What I do know though is through the work that we've been doing in what I've mentioned in UAV for Africa, and we try and design and conceptualize different types of drones using some interns, undergraduates that we upskill. There is an inherent passion for flying that doesn't really leave you. It actually gets amplified, mainly because as you get to know more the intricacies of what it takes to fly, you get to understand how beautiful it is when you do fly, especially when you do fly something that either you've made or you deeply understand, or something that you work really hard to make work. And I do believe that is one thing that J.D. Rawlings really had. He had an incredible passion for flying. Now, that is something that we need to always remember, that we've got to figure out what is our passion. And this person who eventually became president, President Jerry Rawlings, the fourth, I believe, democratic president of Ghana, that's where he started. He started with a passion for flying, a passion for understanding the intricacies of an incredible multi-million dollar aircraft and becoming the best, becoming a top gun, becoming someone who flies and who is able to do acrobatics more than anybody else in the whole country. That is who he was. Now, when you think about what does it take to get to that point, what does it take to figure out how to become the best? What does it take to figure out what type of personality and quality traits do I need to have? It's not about competition, but I do believe it's about bettering yourself every single time, and almost a relentless spirit to really want to explore the unknown, especially when it comes to flying. Because fundamentally, flying is all about exploring the unknown. That's one of the reasons why I am aeronautical engineer and striving to continue in this career, because that is the essential premise that drives most of us who are in this industry, is the passion for discovering the unknown from the skies. Now, if I were to think about some characteristics, personal characteristics and skills of Jerry Rawlings, I would think of someone who had a lot of training. I mean, he was in the military, but not training in terms of being a militant or training. Of course, he had to do that, but specifically for pilot and a pilot to become that good to handle a fighter jet, it was flight training. Now, again, if you haven't watched Top Gun, please do so. I mean, they're not sponsoring this podcast for sure. So this is really purely a personal taste. But what you learn from there and what you learn about flight is that it is not straightforward. It's almost counterintuitive when it comes to learning how to master an aircraft. It is all about learning to understand your fears, learning to understand your limits, learning to understand what it means to push the boundary. When I think about learning about your fears, one of the good places that I always go to is you are at the theme park, right? And there is the biggest ride, the scariest ride. Usually it's the biggest, and it is usually the ones that you have people screaming, ah, like really far away, or someone just really shouting really loudly with high pitched voice. And the first thing you need to be asking yourself is, if I am scared, is it worth conquering my fears? Now, if I were to ask the same thing to my wife, she'd be like, uh-uh. I ain't gonna, this is not a philosophical question for me, my man. You guys go on. I am not gonna join you. Now, one could say maybe she will need to conquer her fears in something less dramatic. But it is an analogy, right? Where you do have a choice. You do have a choice to conquer your fears. You do have a choice to experiment at least once what it means to be completely free of comfort. And that's essentially what flying does. It literally removes you from the comfort of the ground. And of course, most of you have flown an airplane before, but when you're flying, not in an organized manner where you have many other people who are in the same boat in a way, but it's just you. And that's what Jerry Rowling had. It was just him in the aircraft. It was a single seater, like I mentioned. So you are essentially in the air by yourself. You're essentially in the air looking at the navigation system and the communication system and the radar, and whether the fuel tank is healthy and whether the navigation system is healthy. And it's all down to you, but you have to have the awareness and the spatial awareness that this is indeed an environment where your fears have to leave you, your fears have to depart from you, your fears have to indeed help you to just get sharper and not completely crumble. So there was an element of that in his training for sure, but I also do think there was an element of that adaptability, right? He was adaptive. He managed to adapt. He managed to change his understanding of what it means to be the best. He managed to figure out what it means to to get to a point where he's able to perform at the highest level. He had to adapt, but he also had to adapt to something even more important. He had to adapt to the fact that while he's while he's getting this passion, while he's really honing in on his skills, while he's really figuring out what it means to grow in his career, right? Because literally he became a lieutenant and fundamentally had the career ahead of him. One could argue a lot of us watching this podcast or listening to this podcast are actually on a career path. But there was one fundamental thing that was missing. The environment around J.A. Rawlings was not right. It was not right. Or at least according to him, it bothered him. It bothered him that his country was not going in the right direction and potentially affected his day to day work, or affected his regiment, or affected his entire squadron, where fundamentally budget cuts came or inefficiencies in the army were permanent there, and it's something that fundamentally had to be done. But yet he didn't allow and just turn the blind eye. It bothered him, and I do believe there is an element of that we will talk about in terms of self-reflective questions. that we should apply in our lives. But I do think, in my view, there is something that when it comes to flying, that doesn't leave you. And what is that? Flying, or at least building things that fly, you start to have a very good appreciation for how little margin of error do you have. An airplane is almost to almost to the last decimal, if I can put it that way, symmetric. What does symmetric mean? It means that an airplane needs to look exactly the same if you were to cut it in half, whether it's the left part or the right part. And the main reason for that is because if an airplane doesn't look and is not symmetric, it fundamentally degrades how well it will be flying. It fundamentally it prevents it from flying straight for a long time. But more importantly, it fundamentally hampers a person like a fighter jet pilot, if it's a fighter jet plane, from achieving incredible feats of aerobatics because you're always fighting against something that doesn't want to fly straight. But there's also something else there. Oh, there's also an underlying message or underlying principle when it comes to aeroplanes or things that fly, specifically aircraft. I think we can all go into helicopters and other things, but it's not the principle is not the same, in at least in my view, because an aeroplane, just like a paper aeroplane, and I'm sure maybe you have done the exercise. If you don't know how to make a paper airplane, I will suggest you Google it, how to make a paper airplane. And one thing that you will learn very, very quickly in what happens when you make a paper airplane is any sort of change or any sort of mistake in you trying to fold nicely the one wing against the other and see that in actual fact it is not the same size, that airplane will fundamentally never fly straight. Doesn't matter how you launch it, doesn't matter you launch it really fast or really slow, that airplane will never fly straight. And that's essentially the principle that an airplane being symmetric requires, and how much a pilot needs to control the airplane if it wasn't symmetric. So there is some element of that when it comes to his mindset of what was happening around him. His mindset about that things were not right, things are not okay. When I fly my plane needs to fly straight. Why isn't my country going straight? Why isn't my country direct? Why isn't my country clear on its objective? Why are the people suffering? Why are we not having economic? I mean, we are independent. We have moved forward. We have moved on from the British. Why are we suffering more than when we were in under a colonial power? That must have been his questions in his mind. And for him, not being able to answer those questions and not be able to have clear self determination on how to deal with those questions bothered him. What bothers you? What bothers you? And to the point where whatever that bothers you really causes you to really think about what should I do about it? What can I do about it? Should I do something about it? Am I even qualified? And oftentimes these are things that cause us to even just stop thinking about it. But fundamentally, Jerry Rawlings was not a politician. He was a Top Gun pilot who became a politician because something bothered him. And the skill set and the background and the flight training and the exercising and the spatial awareness and the continuous improvement to wanting to be better fundamentally fueled his agenda to put those skills onto the political scene for the betterment not just of himself, of his career, but for the betterment of his people, the Ghanaian people. Wow. Now that is challenging for me because it basically says to me, am I ready to do the same? Am I ready for that sacrifice? Because fundamentally there's no different skills that potentially a Jerry Rawlings had in his career throughout becoming better and better in his career that would have hampered him from making that shift and that decision to really go into a political scene to for the betterment of his people, not himself, for of his people. So it is something that I thought I should bring up, and it's an amazing story, right? When you think about, most people think about, well, a president is a president. There isn't so much, and I guess he'll be better known for his mishaps or his achievement as a president. But there is a backstory. And I do believe that backstory fueled his relentless nature, fueled his military stand on anti-corruption. He fueled his willingness to ensure that things are done properly and according to the book in most cases, as the history showed us. But I think it also fueled his desire to want to see things change, to want to see things really grow and become better than what they were before. And that is essentially a legacy that he leaves with us today that we should all inspire to be. So I thought we should tackle potentially some questions that if he was in front of me today, I would be asking him. Unfortunately, he's no longer with us. So I thought I should have that discussion with myself, and of course we can really leave some comments below, and give me your perception of what you think of some of these questions and how you reflect on them. One of the first questions that I think, when we talk about J.D. Rawlings and his story and the context, is, how do I improve my self-discipline? How do I improve being more self-disciplined? What does that mean? What is self-discipline? Let's start there. What does that even mean? Now, I can tell you what, in my view, what self-discipline isn't. Self-discipline, I've heard a lot of people talk about, and I've watched some videos that talk about self-discipline is self-love. Self-discipline is the ability to love yourself, the ability to have a mental picture of the person who you want to be. And it is, in my view, all these, in my view, and don't judge me, but that's just how I see it. And I guess also from a Christian background, that doesn't resonate at all. Mainly because I mentioned my very first podcast, I mentioned, if you want to be resilient, it doesn't come from within. Neither does self-discipline, or at least the definition how what we think self-discipline is. Now that's the first one. There is we got to kill some myths about what self-discipline is. Second, self-discipline is something you inherently have. It's just that you don't realize that it is self-discipline. What do I mean by that? And it may sound a bit cliche, but let's just take some time to think about this. Self-discipline is all around you, that you are acting subconsciously. There is a self-discipline that your body acts in terms of breathing. You are breathing every single day, in and out. Your body is forcing you, whether you're tired, whether you're angry, whether you are thirsty, whether you are running, or whether you are swimming. Your body consistently tells you, breathe. Breathe in, breathe out. Breathe in, breathe out. Do you know what that is? That is your body being self-disciplined about breathing. Now, it may sound really, really stupid, but that's what it is. It is a consistent in and out activity, repetitive over and over again, but for a survival, for your body to stay alive as you breathe in air and breathe it out. Now, let's take another example, and you can see where I'm going with this. Your body is fundamentally, inherently self disciplined when it comes to eating. And you can even see it whenever you're sick. Your body, at some point, whenever you're sick, potentially depending on the sickness, would consistently try and feed itself, irrespective of how you feel. You would, your stomach will somehow digest, and of course, depending on the food and depending on the illness, and of course, there's a lot of variance in what I'm saying. But fundamentally, there is a self discipline in you eating. Now, this is not even subconscious anymore. It's you making the effort to say, my body is hungry, or the other way around, my body is full, I will stop eating. And of course, don't get me wrong, there are exceptions, and this is another topic on its own regarding, how much food you're eating and the self-control that comes with eating too much and so forth. But fundamentally, it's the other way around when it comes to hunger. Hunger is an inherent self-discipline that you go through on a daily basis ever since you were born, where you will cry for food because you want to be self disciplined in staying alive. And that is very, very important because why do I say this? We shouldn't be misguided that you don't have self discipline, so you must look for it. You and I are inherently in different areas, always, if not masters of self control or self discipline. And why is that important? Why is that important in improving your self discipline? Because for you to improve your self discipline, you need to recognize areas where you already are disciplined. And you may be thinking, but I feel like there aren't any areas where I am disciplined. Yeah, I feel like I'm messing up in every area. No. If you were to really think about it, just like I said, if you were to break it down to basic needs level, those basic needs are met because you have self discipline. Those basic needs every single day, you being alive, are met because you have self discipline. Now, the question for improving self discipline in areas where you feel like you are lacking self discipline is you understanding why, in the areas that you have self discipline, you keep doing it almost subconsciously, if not already subconsciously. That is the question. Why are some areas of our lives, like us eating, us breathing, a self discipline in action that is fundamentally subconscious? I.e., you not really think about it, but you do it because it's survival mode. It is, it basically saying to you, your body is saying to you, if I don't do it, I don't survive. And that is essentially what you need to get into the mindset that what if you want to improve this area of your life to be more self-disciplined, whether it is your school, whether it is your work, and I'm not coming from a place where I am a guru of self-discipline. There are many areas where I feel like I'm still don't have the right level of self-discipline. But I also know that there are areas where I've mastered consciously to be self-disciplined. Is because you are, in my view, you are coming from a place of desperation. You're coming from a place of, you've had enough. I will not survive if this doesn't change. Cannot live with myself if this doesn't change. I cannot be me if this doesn't change. And that is the start of self discipline to the point where it becomes subconscious. The real self discipline is the self discipline that you don't have to think about. The real self discipline is the self discipline that acts on its own because it's driven by some feelings or some mechanism, either mentally or physically, that drives it consistently. Now, you may be thinking, okay, so how do I get to that point? I will have maybe a few kind of stages if I were to think about it. There was, and I'll take a story from my past, there was a point in time whereby I I wasn't a good student, and I mentioned that in the first episode. And how did I get to a point where, and that's basically, maybe some of you had that question. How did I get to a point where not only, I mean, I failed my second year, I was, where I wouldn't say I have a regret for, but I also know that wasn't my best moment. And the question, how did I transition from that picture, this guy failing, a failure, not knowing where to go, to someone who today managed to achieve part-time a PhD while traveling the world and being in different countries and trying to and raising a family and being married for the past 13, 14 years. Happily married, I must say. Uh, what type of this, how did I get to that point where my self-discipline is is to a certain level where I'm able to achieve those things? Now, it's not really without bragging, but I think it's quite important to the argument of how do you get there, how do you improve there. One of the fundamental things I had to realize for myself is I absolutely, absolutely hated the fact of feeling like a failure. Even till today, when I think about it, when I think of the time where I got my test back and it showed an F and I was shattered. And I remember crying at times and I'm thinking, what is going on? This is not me. This is not who I am. I am not a failure. And it goes also hand in hand with the people around you, the people who are surrounding you, your support structure. What do they say about you? Do they prop you up and say, man, this is not who you are? You are not a failure. You've got to do better. So I was privileged enough to have a family, a loving family, a mother, a father, my sister Rita, who fundamentally pushed and helped me to self-identify, to say, dude, you're not a failure. Wake up. You're not a failure. Wake up. And so the the strong feeling of not feeling that way fueled a survival mode of getting better. And of course, it starts step by step. Of course, it starts with you understanding what you need to do, what are the small wins you need to have, rinse and repeat, get small wins into bigger wins into biggest wins, and fundamentally get all of that ranked up in your subconscious to the point where it becomes just part of you. Now, there are compromises to get into that point. For example, I don't remember, because I had to do all these things in parallel. I had to study, I had to work, I had to, obviously church. I'm a disciple, trying to figure out different things. There's a compromise. And the compromise is some things have to go. But I was okay with that because the sense of desperation was big enough to let go of certain things that I thought I needed to do. For example, me consistently going out and spending money in restaurant had to go. Why? Because now I use my money to learn, I use my money to study, I use my money to do X, Y, and Z to take care of family and so forth. And fundamentally, I didn't have any budget left for extramurals of those kinds. But most probably, most importantly, the one other thing is that the leisures that I used to have, like time for TV games, time for binging and just watching things too late at night or the whole of Saturday and the whole of Sunday, also left for years. I just wasn't, I don't remember the last time I played a TV game, actually. Now I'm confessing. Maybe it's not a good confession, but it is my life. It is what it is. I'm being vulnerable and I'm being open. That's the compromise of self-discipline. That's the compromise of self-discipline to the point where it becomes subconsciously um, motivated and fueled. That it's no longer about what I'm trying to improve. It's actually now the question of who am I trying to be? I'm trying to be more like me because more like me is good at X, Y, and Z, is repeatedly able to do X, Y, and Z. That is me. The old me was not me. The me that comes early at things, the me that shows up and is ethical about everything that he does or she does, that is me. Self-discipline fueled by desperation of being your true self. Okay, so that is one question that I think Jerry Rawlings, in my view, consistently had to consistently question himself, and I'm sure was really a master in what it meant to be a self-discipline, especially as a fighter jet pilot. Now, there's another question that I think is pertinent here: is what what is the difference between a job, a career, and a calling? What is the difference between a job, a career, and a calling? Now, you can watch a lot of people on YouTube or wherever and read blog posts about, it goes along the lines of, a job is what you work at McDonald's. It's just a job. You equate you trade your time for just someone else's happiness, and you're expandable, and it's not really what you want to do, and you're just doing it because that's the last thing on earth that was available, and it's just a job. And then some people will say, okay, a career is fundamentally, being a doctor, and the career of being a doctor is that's the career, right? You are going through steps. You study in medical school, you graduated, you now, in practice, or at least you're in hospital doing your practicals, and then now you are becoming a surgeon, and that's a career as a doctor with some element of jobs in between here and there that you just have to do. And a calling is kind of like the pinnacle, where you could say the job is a calling, and fundamentally you could also say that it is something that allows you to consistently bring um, joy to people around you, and you want to see how you can perform for the people around you, and you have an innate ability to do that, and it is really something that motivates you, and there's little effort in you actually multiplying that effort. I think all of those things are correct, but I do think there's a fundamental difference between the three, and and I do think it has a lot to do with the story today of J. Rawlings. And I'll put it very simply, and this is my interpretation and why is it important to kind of distinguish? Because we do struggle with it, right? Most of us do struggle with, is my current job just a job? Am I really in the right career? You know, am I even called to do this? What am I called to do? And a lot of us who are working and trying to, or the studies or are studying and are trying to figure out where you want to work, you will struggle with this question at some point in time. So I'm gonna try and make it as as simple, at least for me, and try and share my thoughts. The difference between a job, a career, and a calling is is how do you feel about the energy you spend? How do you feel about the energy you spend most of the time? Because fundamentally, a career, within a career, there's a job. And within the career, you probably chose that career because there was something that called you, that you identified, that allowed you to have the right self discipline to pause and to learn and to internalize this very vision of yourself in this career. So fundamentally, the job, career, and calling are all intertwined into one. There isn't a distinction. For me, it's not about self fulfillment. In actual fact, it's the opposite. It's the understanding that you have to figure out the energy that you spend. How do you feel about it? How does it resonate with you? Does it really make sense to you? So, in actual fact, what am I saying? I'm saying there shouldn't be a job versus career or a job versus calling or a calling versus career. The discussion should actually be more about on a daily basis. If you were not being paid to spend this energy that you're spending on, do you go to bed feeling like you've added value to someone else? Do you add value? Because I can bet you that even the person who works at a McDonald's or a KFC in South Africa or a Nando's or wherever the case may be has moments where he feels like the employee of the month and he feels like he is adding value and he feels like he actually could become manager and could become district manager and own one or two or three or four McDonald's and feel like maybe this is his calling, maybe this is what God has decided for him or her to do, and not necessarily fundamentally think that it's a job. And these are moments, and that's why for me it's intertwined. It's all about managing your energy, managing what you feel is right, not only for you, but more specifically and more importantly, how does that energy impact others? The activity that you're doing, does it have an impact on others? Now, we can have a debate on this. I'm really excited to hear what you think about this, but this is kind of a concept I'm playing with when it comes to these different terminologies because it's all about energy and how do you feel about it? At least for me, how do I feel about being an engineer and working to make aircraft? I am ecstatic about it. Is it hard? You bet you. Does it sometimes feel like I'm working for the wrong company? You bet you. So it's quite important for most of us to have an intrinsic understanding of the differences because it is quite important. Now, like I said, for me, it is intertwined. Having a job within a career, but also a career with elements of being called to do certain things within that career that is not only an impact for yourself, but an impact for people. So the real question should actually be, how do I leverage more of the very things that impacts people, the very things that is intrinsic to me as something that I enjoy doing, but also something that other people can benefit from? How do I leverage it? How do I maximize it? How do I, within the context that I'm in, within the job that supposedly is so mundane that I'm in, how do I maximize my personality trait for the benefit of myself, but also for the people around me or my coworkers? That is something that Jerry Rawlings did incredibly well, where he turned the very skills of a fighter pilot, he turns the very skills of a motivator, of someone who's concerned about the state of his country, and he turned it into a calling within, in my view, a career of an effective strategist, an effective leader, an effective super achiever when it comes to being a fighter pilot turned into a revolutionary president. Now, that is the story of Jerry Rawlings. That is, in a sense, what we can learn from him, what we can apply in our own lives, how we can be better, how can we ask the right questions, how can we be excited about the calling being within our career as we perform different jobs as we go along. How can we maximize? How can we expose? How can we levitate? How can we amplify the very calling that not only serves ourselves, but more importantly, actually is amplified as you impact other people? And that is the Molo Molo philosophy. The Molo Molo philosophy is, how do I slowly change? How do I slowly grow? How do I slowly build character that fundamentally turns my mindset of thinking that I have just a job, but realizing that my job is helping me to amplify my calling? That is something that I take from this. I take away from J. Rawling someone who wasn't scared to face the truth about his country, about himself, about the things that he has to change. He wasn't scared to face the fact that he could turn the very career that he loved, but just, the fighter jets and the military and the prestige that comes with being a pilot, into going to the dungeons of villages, the dungeons of political landscape, of being insecure about, having to now deal with all these people who desire and yearn for change and for freedom, to use the very skills that he learned for the better of his people. He was an incredible aviator. He had an incredible understanding of aeronautics. He had an incredible understanding of flight performance, of communication, of navigation, of radar. And he used those very things to liberate the Ghanaian people towards economic freedom or economic betterment for all. Now that is a story worth telling, and that is Molo Molo. Thank you for watching. I really appreciate it, of all everybody who's given me great advice for the show. We will continue to try and improve it, make it better. And of course, if you have topics that you think should be worth coming onto the show, please leave it in the comments below. Please don't be shy to subscribe. Wherever it is, in whatever platform, make sure you click the subscribe button and put a like if you indeed found this valuable. This is Molo Molo African Tech Stories, where we discover the incredible stories of African tech champions and innovators that are shaping the African continent. I am Dr. Bolan Kantwe, and I'll see you in the next one. Ciao.